2 wheels in a metal frame, a couple gears, handlebars, and 2 pedals. The culmination of 200 years of innovation led us to the bike. It was a marvel that allowed people to accelerate their commute. Its use in transportation, however, was quickly superseded by faster, yet more dangerous methods. Consequently, the bike never truly had the chance to be tested as a viable form of transportation. That is, until now. As more and more cities are shifting towards less car-centric models of society, the bicycle is seeing a resurgence in popularity. The bicycle is a simpler means of transportation that encourages and fosters community, conservation, and health. A bicycle allows the rider to enjoy the sights and scenes around them, exposing them to the outside world, much less isolating than the metal frame of a car. Nationwide, there's been a sharp increase in the number of individuals who ride bikes, whether for sport or as a means of transportation. This number went up by 4.5 million between 2014 and 2017, reaching 47.5 million participants. In cities across the country, the amount of people biking has increased by more than 60%. Nowhere is this more evident than in Atlanta. Atlanta is infamous for having the most expensive commute in the United States. It's plagued with traffic and congestion, currently standing as the city with the 9th worst commute time in the world. To mitigate this, Atlanta government has made efforts to expand on alternative modes of transportation, from public transit to pedestrian lanes to bikes. In the past few years, cycling has become a focal point in Atlanta, growing from a sidelined hobby to a communal activity. Cycling's growth over the past few years is significant. The number of cyclists passing through certain areas is measured through the use of automated counters spread throughout the city. However, one doesn't need to look at those figures to see the vast changes. Bicycle-related events have grown in popularity. Atlanta Streets Alive, an event in which pedestrians and cyclists come together to temporarily close down street access for cars and to promote street safety, had 325,000 attendees in 2018. This is a sharp increase from the 10,000 cyclists that the festival began with in 2010. Similarly, the Atlanta Cycling Festival hosted a record 3,300 cyclists last year. Whether it's a race, a group ride, or bicycle camping, it isn't hard to find a cycling event bustling with life in Atlanta. The expansion of cycling as a pastime and mode of transportation has fostered a thriving community, but as the number of people cycling grows within the city, a darker side to the trend has shown itself. An overwhelming sense of fear is emerging, and can bring cycling to a complete break.
Developing right now, Spalding County deputies investigating after a car hit an 8-year-old child who was riding a bicycle.
Just last week, 2 people, one pedestrian, one bicyclist, was killed when they were hit by people driving cars.
Friends and family members surrounded David Whitlock as he shared words about his son Andrew. He told everyone here that if you're a cyclist, always wear a band like his with your ID information.
I never ride without it.
The mounted GoPro on Stuart Bryson's bicycle is there for his safety. Sunday, it captured the moment he says someone's road rage fractured his neck.
You know, it's not just me who lost somebody. It's not just my mom or Martin's parents or his brother. It's all of Sandy Springs who lost a smiling face in the morning. And they won't get it back again.
Every day, cyclists face immense dangers on the road. Issues can range from simple traffic violations to full-blown crashes. Car drivers are encased in layers of steel and aluminum that shield them from the outside elements. Cyclists, on the other hand, are exposed. Crashes at 40 miles per hour are often fatal for the cyclist, and they are all too common. This stems from the ignorance of the public and the drivers themselves. Most drivers on the road don't know the laws surrounding cyclists at all. In fact, mandated driver's education courses don't cover any laws concerning cyclist safety. From the beginning, the scales are stacked against bikes.
So one of the laws that came about most recently within the last few years that's been very helpful is what's called the 3-foot law. And it's just part of the law that determines a reasonably safe distance for somebody in a car to pass somebody on a bike.
This law defines reasonably safe as 3 feet between the mirrors of a car and the handlebars of a bike, which isn't much, but for a cyclist, it can be the difference between life and death.
So, it's an important law that's there to help protect us. A lot of drivers are not aware that it's even a law. A lot of police officers, sadly, aren't even aware that it's the law. So we do try to do our part to help spread some education about that particular law and make sure that it's enforced properly.
In terms of legislation, there are ordinances and laws that have been passed to protect cyclists, but they are rarely enforced because ignorance of bike safety laws extends even to the police force. Police tend to have a negative view pertaining to all cyclists. When a cyclist reports a crash or violation by a car, police reports are most likely to show a clear bias towards the driver, placing the fault on the cyclists. It is hard to understand the actions of bike riders from inside a car. Many drivers are angered by cyclists moving into their lane. However, these moves are generally made for the safety of the rider. Often, bike lanes are misused by indifferent drivers who illegally occupy them or even park their cars along them. Even in the case where the cars are not directly in the lane, their close proximity means that any sudden motions from the vehicles force cyclists to veer out of the way and into the road. Something as simple as the opening of a car door can mean serious injury for a cyclist.
When you don't have a protected bike lane, or even when you do, cars find a way to stop in it. And that's uncomfortable, that's dangerous, that undermines the value of the infrastructure. If you're riding in the bike lane, you have to then merge into the travel lane, and it's sort of anyone that's comfortable on that bike lane would need to then be someone that's comfortable riding in the road. And so it doesn't help people that are sort of new bikers to feel comfortable biking. And then when that happens on a two-way bike facility, it's even more dangerous.
Visibility is key in bike safety and is another reason cyclists may choose to enter a lane. Drivers are on the lookout for other cars when they're on the road. This doesn't mean they're watching carefully for everyone.
We hear this all the time. Car makes a left turn in front of somebody who's on a bike, boom, they hit. The person on the bike says, I don't understand it. I was looking right at them and we made eye contact and they were looking right at me. And the driver tells the cop, they came out of nowhere. I don't know what happened, right? So the driver's looking ahead, but they're only looking for cars. And when you're not looking for somebody on a bike, you don't see it. They're invisible.
In these scenarios, the safest place for a bike to be is the center of the road, where drivers are forced to pay attention to them. But in a society where everyone seems to be in a rush, cyclists are pushed to the side, and accidents are inevitable. Though the roads are public domain, law enforcement tends to favor cars, making cyclists at fault in the event of a crash.
There's a tremendous bias in the way that bicycle crashes are investigated by police officers. And it even goes back a step prior to that. It's just a bias against people who ride bikes to begin with. So usually right from the start, we're having to undo that bias to just get back to a neutral telling of the story of how it really happened. We hear things all the time that you look at that and you think that, okay, this seems pretty clear that this would be a driver's fault, and yet the way it's written up in the police report just finds ways to support the driver and blame the cyclist regardless of how it happened.
Public attitude is also extremely biased against cyclists in general. Cycling is perceived to be an activity reserved for hardcore athletes training for competition, cutting corners on the road to get a better time. In reality, this could not be farther from the truth.
So in the built-up city, I couldn't go too fast because you had these 70-year-old grandmas on the bikes, and you had these 20 and 30-year-old parents with their children in a basket on a bike.
However, because of the stereotype, cycling can seem to only be viable for a small percentage of the population, people who can dare to risk their lives for some exercise. Cyclists are characterized to be risk-taking, reckless, and unafraid of a potential crash. Though these attributes may fit a few individuals, biking should not be perceived as an extreme sport. People often also say that these cyclists are the ones in violation of numerous laws. Though cars prey on them, in reality, due to their size and speed, bikes don't pose a danger or threat to anyone. A large part of solving the issue and reducing the fatalities from cars overall is the addition of more cyclists on the road.
One of the things that makes biking safer is having more people bike. The more bikers are expected along the roads, the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition has a little phrase that they use that's just expect bikes. The more bikes are expected throughout the city, the safer all the interactions will be.
Having more cyclists on the streets forces drivers to be more aware of them, benefiting not only the cyclists, but pedestrians as well. In other words, more cyclists can lead to safer streets. Thus, the prejudice that cyclists face comes largely without cause. Bikes improve our society in numerous ways. Many believe that bikes hinder the flow of traffic, but the more people that bike, the fewer cars there are on the road. Drivers face less traffic in areas that are highly bikeable. In Arlington, Virginia, for example, the decrease amounted to a drastic 15 to 20% decline, cutting down commute times and helping drivers travel more efficiently. Cycling also improves public health by allowing people to exercise, reducing the risk of obesity, heart disease, and other common ailments. This can have a tremendous effect on the population and can even lower healthcare costs. QBP, a bicycle distribution chain, found a 4.4% or $200,000 decrease in costs after implementing bike-to-work programs. Also, since bikes produce zero carbon emissions, they are much cleaner for the environment than cars. 60% of trips in a car go less than 2 miles, a distance that can easily be traveled in 10 minutes on a bike. Biking a 4-mile commute rather than driving would reduce carbon emissions by 2,000 pounds in 1 year, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. So if the general population used bikes instead for short trips, that would drastically help reduce our carbon footprint. All of these benefits are good, but they amount to nothing if the safety of cyclists cannot be guaranteed. Infrastructure is one of the most critical parts in improving cycling in Atlanta. Bike lanes are the foundation of extending bike usage. These lanes increase accessibility to bikes for the entire population. They allow the cycling population to increase in numbers and in safety. A study conducted surrounding bike-friendly communities found the cycling population increased by 105% in less than a decade. In contrast, in non-cycling communities, the percentage of cyclists only grew by 31% in the same amount of time. In other words, there was a 74% difference in growth between areas that were bike-friendly and others that weren't. These results show just how much people are dependent on existing infrastructure to ride. In Atlanta, there are only 118 miles of bike lanes compared to its sprawling roads and highways. Though this is an immense increase of 65.1 miles of bike lanes since 2010, there's still much more to be done. There are many multi-use paths and parks and trails, but they all carry the same vein of issues. Many of Atlanta's bike paths are disconnected and closed to the public at certain hours.
So those are mostly recreational oriented partly because they're closed in the hours of darkness. First of all, that needs to change. Every multi-use trail in all of Metro Atlanta better be open 24/7 because it should be a viable part of our transportation network. It's way more than a multi-use trail. It's crazy. It's a big park. But you put these in, and we need to connect the dots. So the regional trail network, if you go to Google Maps, there's these gaps of a couple of miles here, a couple of miles there.
If bike lanes in Atlanta aren't connected, it defeats the purpose of biking as a mode of transportation. In order for bikes to be seriously considered as an option for transportation, the destinations and the roads need to be accessible to the people using them. Putting the availability of bike lanes aside, the paths themselves are not necessarily safe. On roads where their only protection is a strip of paint separating them from the speeding cars, no cyclist is inclined to ride often. Even if the problems of distracted and reckless driving were to be eliminated, current bike infrastructure would not be enough to protect cyclists. Most people say that they would ride more if there were more protective measures, and studies show that people with bike lanes feel 90% safer. One group of concerned cyclists took matters into their own hands by placing red solo cups on the paint line defining the boundaries of bike lanes, and found that within minutes, all of them were flattened. The Red Cup project illustrates the extent of the dangers that come with cycling. The red solo cup has become a somber symbol of how many cars, unknowingly or not, pass over the white line. For cyclists, the bike lane is supposed to be a safe, protected area. When its borders are not respected by passing vehicles, it places cyclists in harm's way.
We have a bicycle that people are starting to realize is relatively easy. If you have the space to ride it, it's fun and it's safe and it's enjoyable. But if you don't have the space to ride it safely, it can be stressful, it can be a strain, it can be scary.
Cycling doesn't have to be stressful. Protective barriers make the roads safer and give optimal space for cyclists to ride. There are many options for implementing them. Some examples that Atlanta has today are delineator posts, stripe buffers, and planters. All of these protective measures provide an extra 2 to 3 feet of space between cars and bike lanes. The single-stripe bike lane is the most typical, but it shields cyclists the least. Construction of barriers is often slow-moving and highly contested. Drivers fear that narrowing lanes will slow their commutes. Additionally, the expense of construction makes many oppose new barriers. Buffers cost anywhere between $8,000 and $16,000 per mile of lane, and the price only goes up from there. Building delineator posts ranges in cost from $15,000 to about $30,000. To many drivers, this seems like a hefty expense, especially because they may feel that it doesn't benefit them. However, safe streets are better for everyone. Despite their concerns, it's in Atlanta's best interest to begin investing in some barriers. Even if they are not implemented on every street, these protections can bring peace of mind to cyclists and encourage more individuals to take up cycling. In addition, there are inexpensive solutions that Atlanta can implement, like simply lining street parking in between a road and a bike lane. Many of these solutions have unintended benefits. For example, planters lining roads bring more greenery to the city. They improve the aesthetics of the roads while bringing comfort to cyclists and pedestrians. Additionally, the influx of cyclists can bring more business and more potential customers to an area. A New York City study found that a protected bike lane addition caused a 49% drop in commercial vacancies. Even once the barrier of public opinion is overcome, there stands the matter of government approval. One main issue with the availability of protected bike lanes is just how long they take to implement. Traditional traffic projects can take multiple years, going through committees, planning, design work, and much more before being finalized. This causes projects that can only be a mile long to take as many as 10 years. Atlanta needs to rethink how these plans work and should find a way to introduce more high-quality projects in less time, accelerating the whole cause. These constructions are an important step towards complete street safety. However, the problem cannot be fixed by them alone. Once the needed infrastructure is put in place, then there are further measures that need to be taken to reduce the amount of high-speed bike collisions from cars.
But if your road is designed for high speed, people will drive as fast as they're comfortable. And so how can you create that space, but also think about the roads holistically and think, how can this road be safer for everyone? Putting the bike lane in makes it safer for pedestrians because it separates them farther away from the cars. It can reduce the number of lanes that you have to cross. And it also makes it safer for drivers and everyone else.
Slowing cars makes travel much safer for everyone on the road. This can be done using traffic calming measures, including lowering the speed limit, narrowing lanes, or adding pedestrian crossing islands and trees to prevent speeding. Traffic calming measures usually result in smoother traffic as well as a much more organized roadway system for everyone. One law that has already been implemented in 9 states is the Vulnerable User Law. The definition of a vulnerable user varies from state to state, but the premise is the same. Car riders must be held accountable for any injury they may cause. In states with vulnerable user laws, penalties are harsh for vehicles that break existing road laws. Each of these measures aims to reach the same goal, Vision Zero. Vision Zero is the idea of creating safe streets that cause 0 fatalities. No cyclist should lose their life as a result of speeding cars. No pedestrian should be hit for crossing the street. This is the idyllic future that cyclists dream of, and as cycling re-enters the focus of society, more work is being done to get there. As the city of Atlanta continues to grow, the future of cycling seems promising. This September, Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, announced a $5 million plan to provide for more bike infrastructure. And though experts have had mixed reviews on how much it would help the cycling community, Bottoms' insistence on a bicycle project shows how much Atlanta is willing to change. Though the problems cyclists face won't be fixed overnight, it's still a step in the right direction. Atlanta's efforts in making the city a more bike-friendly community have been showing visible results. In 2018, Bicycling Magazine ranked Atlanta 42nd out of the 50 best biking cities in the United States, taking into account safety, friendliness, energy, and culture. As recently as 4 years ago, Atlanta didn't make the cut. This new ranking reflects the many strides the city of Atlanta has made to improve and popularize riding bicycles. There are constantly new bike projects built for cyclists around Metro Atlanta, but not all of them are sponsored by the government. The Path Foundation, a non-profit organization, was formed in 1991 by 3 cyclists who wanted to build greenways for Atlanta's cyclists in time for the 1996 Olympics. The narrow goal soon changed to encompass a general objective of extending Atlanta's bike infrastructure to all. In less than 30 years, the Path Foundation has made over 260 miles of paths, trails, and lanes. They are responsible for some of Atlanta's best areas for bicycling, from Silver Comet Trails to Path 400, a trail linking Buckhead to other cities along Georgia 400 freeway. Using money from private investors and supporters, the Path Foundation was able to develop these sweeping plans towards infrastructure. Advocacy groups like these work with the government to fund and plan projects, ultimately creating much more infrastructure than they would alone. As the Path Foundation's success suggests, the rise in bicycling groups greatly benefits the community and promises a bright future for Metro Atlanta. One organization, Sopo Bike Co-op, started an initiative to place bike racks throughout the city. The cycling advocacy community in Atlanta has grown much larger than ever before, especially due to the new phenomenon of scooters and e-bikes that are now scattered throughout the city.
There's a lot of the increase in the way people are thinking about this issue is related to the scooters in Atlanta. And so with the electric scooters, the shareable scooters that have popped up in cities across America, they have reached a slightly different group of people that maybe aren't biking around the city, but are just as interested in ways that they can move around the city more seamlessly, sort of walk trips that are a little bit too far to walk.
The increase in alternate modes of transportation like scooters and e-bikes has opened the eyes of those who previously couldn't understand the dangers of cycling in Atlanta. The Relay Bike Share program allows people to easily rent a bike and ride it to their desired location, giving people who don't own bikes a chance to experience riding. As awareness has grown, the objective to make cycling more accessible has been taken up by many independent groups. Sopo Bike Cooperative offers free bicycle repairs for those who can't afford to take their bikes to a shop. They also donate bikes to people in need to give them new transportation options. This mission even extends to Atlanta's public school system. The Atlanta Bicycle Coalition partnered with local schools to create a program called Shifting Gears. This program educates second graders about bike safety during the school day. The goal is to promote awareness starting at a young age, creating a new generation of cautious drivers and safe cyclists. All of these efforts together have helped to bring cycling to people, regardless of their backgrounds or ages. With a larger group of people who use and need bike lanes and multi-use paths, advocacy is increasing, and the city of Atlanta has given its response, the Beltline. One of Metro Atlanta's greatest feats in cycling, the Beltline was an abandoned railroad loop surrounding the city that went entirely unused. But in the last few years, it has been repurposed into a multi-use lane for cyclists and pedestrians.
So the Beltline is absolutely a game changer. I love that other communities are trying to find ways where they can provide some safe space. City of Brookhaven has just announced the opening of a mile-long stretch of a multi-use path that, it's only a mile, but it's a start. And so the more of this that we have, the more opportunities for people to ride, the better it is for everyone.
Construction first began in 2008, but it now encompasses more than 10 miles, allowing the Metro Atlanta population to come together for events, connecting famous areas like Ponce City Market and Piedmont Park. Art surrounds the Beltline, covering what used to be run-down concrete buildings with vibrant color. The Beltline has gotten a huge amount of support and become one of Atlanta's most popular attractions, serving as an ideal of what well-made cycling infrastructure could be. Throughout the bike's rise in popularity, it has been supported by a group of passionate people believing that the city can and will do better for the safety of all its citizens. From advocacy groups to community rides, the contribution of individuals combined together has made a change for the better. Every day, the need for more support grows, and it's up to the everyday citizen to speak out and make an impact.
The best way to affect change is to show up. To show up to local city council meetings, to show up to a county commission meeting, to show up, to contact your local elected officials and demand they have that change and demand that they do it. That's the biggest change.
Cycling is more than just a mode of transportation or a way to exercise. It's a lifestyle. Bike riders can stop and say hello to people on their way home. They can visit a store or stop to enjoy a view without searching far and wide for a parking spot. This centuries-old invention remains relevant because of the community it builds. A lack of protection has threatened to bring the sport to an end, but as long as there is an outspoken community of cyclists, the bicycle will persevere. The bike was engineered with a person in mind. It's time we engineer the city with a bike in mind.
But you can make a difference by showing up.